The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly in the deserted hallways of Carter and Blake, one of New York's most prestigious law firms, casting a sterile glow over the polished marble floors. It was 11:45 p.m., and the 47th floor, usually a hive of frenetic activity, lay silent except for the soft squeak of a cleaning cart's wheels. Ethan Carter, disguised as Luz Morales, pushed the cart past glass-walled offices, his weathered hands gripping the worn handle with practiced ease. 20 years of cleaning corporate offices, or so his carefully crafted backstory claimed, had taught him to become invisible, a shadow blending into the background of power and privilege. Tonight, that skill would prove more valuable than anyone in the firm could have imagined. Ethan's dark eyes, sharp beneath the brim of his faded cap, scanned the corridor with a vigilance that belied his humble appearance. His janitor's uniform, slightly frayed at the cuffs, hung loosely on his lean frame, but his movements were deliberate, precise. To the lawyers who passed him daily without a glance, he was just another faceless worker, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks. But beneath the facade, Ethan was cataloging every detail. The late-night whispers behind closed doors, the hurried exchanges of documents, the flicker of unease in the eyes of the firm's senior partners. For 3 months, he had played this role, and tonight, the pieces of a puzzle he'd been assembling were about to fall into place. As he neared the document room, a faint anomaly caught his attention. The keycard reader's light blinked green instead of its usual steady red, a subtle deviation that most would overlook. Ethan slowed his pace, his instincts honed by years of boardroom battles and, more recently, covert observation. Through the glass panel of the door, he glimpsed shadows moving inside, unusual for this hour, when the firm's elite had long since retreated to their penthouses or late-night strategy sessions. Pretending to adjust a loose wheel on his cart, he crouched low, his movements unhurried but calculated, giving him time to observe. Inside the room, William Pierce, senior partner, and Lavra Bennett, managing partner, stood over a sleek leather briefcase. William's tailored suit, worth more than a month's salary for a janitor, gleamed under the overhead lights as he stuffed papers into the case with a haste that bordered on paranoia. Lavra, her auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, scanned the room nervously, her fingers clutching a tablet that displayed security logs. "We need to move quickly," she whispered, her voice low but sharp. "If these files surface, the Sullivan case is over, and we're finished." William's jaw tightened, his hand pausing over the briefcase. "Relax, Lavra. No one's here." The system's locked down, and the janitor's too busy mopping floors to care. He gestured dismissively toward the door, oblivious to the man they assumed was just another cog in the building's machinery. Ethan's expression remained neutral, a mask of disinterest perfected over months of practice. He'd learned long ago that the best way to gather information was to appear utterly unremarkable. As he polished the glass door frame, his reflection caught the glint of Laura's diamond earrings, a stark contrast to his own threadbare uniform. But his mind was racing, cataloging every word, every gesture. The Sullivan case, a billion-dollar lawsuit against Sullivan Group, a tech conglomerate accused of financial fraud, had been the talk of the legal world for months. Headlines screamed about corporate greed, and Carter and Blake's reputation hung on securing a win. Yet here were two of the firm's most powerful players, conspiring to sabotage their own case. He moved on, pushing his cart toward the next office, but not before slipping a small notebook from his pocket. In precise, almost executive handwriting, he jotted down, 11:47 p.m. Pierce and Bennett in dock room. Green light, anomaly. Sullivan files mentioned. The note joined dozens of others, each a piece of the intricate web he was weaving. Ethan wasn't just a janitor. He was the CEO of Carter and Blake, and he had returned to his own firm under a false identity to uncover a cancer growing within it. 8 months earlier, Ethan Carter had sat in his corner office, the Manhattan skyline sprawling before him like a chessboard. As CEO, he had built Carter and Blake into a legal powerhouse, known for its unyielding commitment to justice. But a routine audit had revealed cracks in the foundation. Files accessed at odd hours, settlement figures that didn't add up, and encrypted emails hinting at a plan to make Sullivan vanish. At first, he suspected a security breach, perhaps a hacker or a rival firm. But the deeper he dug, the more disturbing the truth became. The corruption wasn't external. It was festering within his own ranks, orchestrated by people he had trusted. For years, he remembered the moment vividly. Late at night, alone in his office, he decrypted an email from William Pierce to an unknown recipient. The Sullivan evidence needs to disappear. $2 million is on the table. The words had hit him like a physical blow. William, his mentor and friend, and Laura, his protégés, were betraying everything the firm stood for. Hiring private investigators or installing official surveillance would have tipped them off. They were too clever, too cautious. So Ethan made a radical decision. He would become invisible, a ghost in his own empire, to expose the truth. With the help of the FBI and a retired federal agent named Miguel Alvarez, Ethan crafted the persona of Luis Morales, a janitor with a fabricated history of dead-end jobs and no ambition. He announced an extended medical leave, citing a vague illness, and handed temporary control to William and Laura. To the world, Ethan Carter was recovering in Europe. In reality, he was scrubbing floors in his own firm, watching, waiting, and gathering evidence. Back in the present, Ethan pushed his cart past the executive suites, the faint hum of the vacuum cleaner masking the rapid beat of his heart. The document room encounter was the clearest sign yet that William and Laura were moving forward with their plan. He paused outside William's office, its mahogany door adorned with a gleaming brass nameplate. Through the glass, he saw a stack of Sullivan case files on the desk, left carelessly in plain sight, a rookie mistake for someone as meticulous as William. Or perhaps a test, Ethan thought, his eyes narrowing. He made a mental note to check the office later. When the building was truly empty, as he turned the corner, he nearly collided with Claire Thompson, a young associate whose ambition shone brighter than her inexperience. Her arms were full of files, her eyes darting nervously as she hurried toward Laura's office. "Sorry," she muttered, barely glancing at him before rushing off. Ethan noted the tension in her posture, the way her fingers clutched the folders as if they were lifelines. Claire was one of the firm's rising stars, but lately she'd been spending too much time with Laura, her idealism eroding under the weight of the firm's darker dealings. Ethan added her name to his mental ledger, a potential ally or another. Pawn in William and Laura's game. The clock struck midnight, and Ethan's shift was nearing its end. He wheeled his cart to the service elevator, its ding echoing in the silent corridor. As the doors closed, he pulled a small device from his pocket, a maintenance remote, or so it appeared. With a subtle press of a button, a network of hidden cameras, installed with the approval of the firm's board and the FBI, began recording. Every office, every hallway, every whispered conversation was now under his watchful eye. He allowed himself a fleeting smile. William and Laura thought they were untouchable, but they had no idea they were being watched by the one person they never bothered to see. Across town, Detective Emily Harris sat in her cramped office at the NYPD precinct, surrounded by stacks of case files and a flickering computer screen. Her desk was a chaos of coffee cups and legal pads, but her mind was razor sharp. For weeks, she'd been tracking irregularities in Carter and Blake's cases, particularly the Sullivan lawsuit. Rumors of organized crime connections had surfaced, whispers of bribes and tampered evidence. When an anonymous tip likely from Ethan himself pointed her toward the firm, she'd started digging. Tonight, her screen displayed a grainy photo of a man in a janitor's uniform, his face partially obscured by a cap. Something about him felt off, not like the typical low-wage worker. She tapped her pen against the desk, her instinct screaming that this case was about to explode. Back at Carter and Blake, Ethan locked his cleaning cart in the maintenance closet and slipped into the shadows of the sub-basement. There, hidden behind a panel, was a secure server uploading the night's footage. He checked the feed, ensuring the document room encounter was captured in crystal clarity. William's words echoed in his mind. No one's here. The janitors, too busy mopping floors to care. The irony wasn't lost on him. For months, he'd been invisible, a ghost in their midst, and they had played right into his hands. As he left the building, the cool night air hit his face, a stark contrast to the stifling tension of the firm. He glanced up at the towering glass facade of Carter and Blake, its lights glinting like a beacon of power. Tomorrow, the firm would descend into chaos, and the trap he'd set would begin to close. For now, he was Luis Morales. The janitor, no one noticed. But soon, he would be Ethan Carter, the man who brought justice to those who thought they were above it. The morning sun pierced through the towering windows of Carter and Blake's 47th floor, but the usual hum of productivity was replaced by a frenetic chaos that rippled through the glass-walled offices. Associates darted between cubicles. There, faces pale with panic, while partners barked orders over speakerphones. At the heart of the storm was the conference room, where William Pierce's voice thundered like a judge delivering a verdict. "This is a disaster," he roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany table, making a junior associate jump. "The Sullivan case file's gone. Every last page. Someone in this firm is a traitor, and I want answers now." Laura Bennett stood at the head of the table, her tablet glowing with security logs, her auburn hair still immaculate despite the tension etching lines around her eyes. "The document room was secure last night," she said, her voice calm but laced with an edge. That silenced the room. Only one person had access after 10 p.m. the janitor, Luis Morales. Her gaze swept over the gathered associates, landing on Claire Thompson, who clutched a stack of folders like a shield. Claire's eyes darted away, her ambition warring with a flicker of unease. She'd been pulled into Laura's orbit weeks ago, tasked with observing Luis, and now the weight of that assignment pressed heavily on her. Ethan Carter, still cloaked in the identity of Luis Morales, stood quietly in the hallway, polishing a glass partition with methodical strokes. His janitor's uniform blended seamlessly into the background, but his ears caught every word filtering through the conference room's open door. He'd anticipated this moment, the moment the Sullivan file's disappearance would be discovered. But the speed and precision of William and Laura's response were impressive, even to him. They were orchestrating a frame-up, and he was their perfect scapegoat. Inside the conference room, Laura tapped her tablet, pulling up grainy security footage. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., showing Luis entering the document room, his cart trailing behind him. The video was deliberately degraded, the details fuzzy enough to obscure context, but clear enough to damn him. "This is no coincidence," William declared, his $10,000 suit unable to mask the slight tremor in his hands. "The Sullivan case is worth billions. Then its team must have paid him off to sabotage us. It's the only explanation." The room erupted in murmurs. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening on her folders. She'd seen Louise lingering near the partners' offices, always cleaning the same spot for too long, but she hadn't felt much of it until Laura pointed it out. Now, doubt gnawed at her. Was she helping expose a criminal, or was she being manipulated? William's eyes met hers, and he gave a subtle nod, as if to remind her of the promotion dangling just out of reach. She swallowed hard and looked away. Ethan, outside, noted the exchange in his small leather-bound notebook, his handwriting as precise as ever. 12:15 p.m. Pierce and bed frame narrative established. Claire compromised. He slipped the notebook back into his pocket, his face a mask of disinterest as he moved to empty a nearby trash can. 3 months, as Luis Morales had taught him to read the room without being seen, and he could sense the tide turning against him. The trap was closing, but it was one he'd anticipated and prepared for by noon. The police had descended on Carter and Blake. Detective Emily Harris led the charge, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights as she navigated the firm's sleek lobby. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd of whispering associates, landing on Luis as he cleaned the lobby windows with slow, deliberate strokes. "Mr. Morales," she said, approaching with 2 uniformed officers at her side, "we need you to come with us." Ethan set down his cleaning supplies with a calm that made Emily pause. Most suspects fidgeted or protested. Luis met her gaze with an unsettling steadiness, his dark eyes carrying a hint of something she couldn't place. Not fear, not defiance, but a quiet anticipation. "Of course, Detective," he replied, his voice low and measured, with just enough of the accent he'd perfected to maintain the ruse. As the officers led him away, William and Laura exchanged satisfied glances from the conference room window, their designer shoes clicking against the marble floor as they watched their plan unfold. The interrogation room at the precinct was a stark contrast to Carter and Blake's opulence. Gray walls, a chipped metal table, and a one-way mirror that reflected Ethan's weathered face. Emily sat across from him, her notebook open, her pen tapping rhythmically. "Mr. Morales," she began, "the Sullivan files are critical to a billion-dollar case. You were the last person in the document room. Care to explain?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his hands folded calmly. "I was cleaning, Detective. Same as every night." His tone was even, but his mind was racing, cataloging her questions, her posture, the faint crease of doubt on her forehead. Emily wasn't convinced by the evidence, he could tell. She'd been chasing leads on Carter and Blake for weeks, and this case felt too neat, too staged. "Cleaning," Emily repeated, flipping through a file. "Yet we have footage of you entering the room at 11:47 p.m. and bank records showing a $50,000 deposit into an account linked to you. Care to explain that?" Ethan's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. The account was a fabrication, of course William and Laura's handiwork. He'd traced their digital fingerprints weeks ago, but he wasn't ready to reveal that. "Yet, sounds like someone's working hard to make me look guilty," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just a janitor, Detective. Why would I risk everything for files I can't even read?" Emily's pen paused. His response was too composed, too articulate for a man with his supposed background. She leaned forward, studying him. "You're not what you seem, Mr. Morales. I've been a cop for 15 years, and I know when something's off. You're holding back." Ethan held her gaze, letting the silence stretch. She was sharp, sharper than William and Laura had anticipated. That made her an ally, even if she didn't know it yet. "I'm just a guy trying to do his job," he said finally, leaning back. "But if you're looking for the truth, check the footage again. Not the one they showed you, the real one." Emily's eyes narrowed, but before she could press further, an officer interrupted with a knock. "Detective, the firm's lawyers are here. They've got more evidence." Back at Carter and Blake, William and Laura had spent the morning perfecting their narrative. In a secluded office, away from prying eyes, they reviewed the doctored footage, ensuring every frame pointed to Luis. Laura's fingers flew across her tablet, deleting segments that showed their own presence in the document room. "This has to be airtight," she muttered, her voice tight with stress. "If even one detail slips, we're exposed." William poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter, his confidence unshaken. "Relax, Laura. Morales is a nobody. No one's going to believe a janitor over us." He gestured to the stack of forged documents on his desk. Bank records, email chains, even a signed confession from Tom Rivera, a maintenance worker who'd been promised a hefty bonus to claim. Luis had bragged about a payoff. "By the time we're done, he'll be lucky to avoid a life sentence." Lavra hesitated, her eyes flickering to the door. What if someone else was there? "The security logs are handled," William cut in, his tone sharp. "The system's been wiped clean. Morales is the only name on the logs, and the footage backs it up. We're untouchable." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Claire Thompson stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Miss Bennett, you wanted me to testify about what I saw." Her voice wavered, and Laura's expression softened, but only slightly. "You did the right thing, Claire," Lavra said, her tone almost maternal. "You saw Morales lingering near William's office during sensitive calls. That's all the court needs to hear. Do this, and you're on track for partner." Claire nodded, but her hands trembled as she clutched her files. She'd noticed Luce's quiet diligence, the way he never complained despite the late hours. Something about this felt wrong, but the promise of a corner office drowned out her doubts. She turned to leave, unaware that a tiny recording device, hidden in the base of a nearby trash can, had captured every word. Ethan, now in a holding cell, sat on the narrow cot, his notebook tucked safely in his uniform's lining. The cell's fluorescent light flickered, casting shadows that danced across the concrete walls. He closed his eyes, replaying the morning's events. William's theatrical outrage, Laura's calculated calm, Claire's hesitation. The frame-up was flawless, a masterclass in manipulation, but they'd underestimated one thing. Him. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the maintenance remote. With a subtle press, he activated another set of cameras, this time in William's office. The footage would show Laura forging the bank records, William coaching Tom Rivera on his testimony. Every move they made was being documented, and Ethan was 3 steps ahead. He allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, scribbling a final note. 12:47 p.m. Frame complete. Trap set. Outside, the city buzzed with rumors of the scandal at Carter and Blake. Reporters gathered at the firm's entrance, their cameras flashing as William and Laura issued a carefully crafted statement. Trusted employee betrays law firm's confidence. But across town, Detective Emily Harris sat at her desk, staring at the doctored footage. Something about it nagged at her, a glitch in the timestamp, a shadow that didn't align. She picked up her phone and dialed a contact at the FBI. "I need you to run a deep dive on Carter and Blake's security system," she said. "This case is too clean. I think we're missing something big." The marble halls of the New York County Courthouse echoed with the soft murmur of anticipation as the trial of Luis Morales began. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor of Courtroom 2B. Ethan Carter, still cloaked in the identity of Luis Morales, sat at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the tailored suits of the prosecution team. His hands rested calmly on the table, but his dark eyes tracked every movement in the room. The shuffle of papers, the nervous glances of junior associates, the confident strides of William Pierce and Lavra Bennett as they entered with military precision. To the world, Luis was a janitor facing ruin. To Ethan, this was the opening move in a carefully orchestrated endgame. Judge Margaret Coleman, her steel-gray eyes sharp behind reading glasses, surveyed the courtroom with the authority of her 30 years on the bench. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor an ability to spot legal sleight of hand. She was a wild card Ethan had accounted for. At his side, Nathan Brooks, his court-appointed attorney, an undercover FBI agent, fumbled with a scuffed briefcase, his tie askew and his suit wrinkled. To the untrained eye, Nathan was a public defender overwhelmed by the might of Carter and Blake's legal machine. But Ethan knew better. Nathan's bumbling was as calculated as his own disguise, a performance to lull the prosecution into complacency. William Pierce rose to deliver the opening statement, adjusting his $10,000 suit with practiced ease. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice resonant with assumed authority. "This is not a simple case of theft. This is a calculated act of corporate espionage that threatens the very foundation of attorney-client privilege. Louise Morales, a trusted employee, betrayed Carter and Blake by stealing critical documents from the Sullivan case, a billion-dollar lawsuit that could reshape the tech industry. The evidence will show his guilt beyond any doubt." From the gallery, Detective Emily Harris watched closely, her notebook open on her lap. She'd spent the past 2 days digging into the case, and something about William's polished delivery felt rehearsed, like a play where every line was memorized too well. Her eyes drifted to Louise, who sat unnaturally still, his gaze fixed on William with an intensity that bordered on clinical. Occasionally, he scribbled in a small leather-bound notebook, his handwriting precise and methodical, not the scrawl of a man who spent his life pushing a mop. Emily's instincts, honed by 15 years on the force, told her this case was a house of cards waiting to collapse. Lavra Bennett took the lead on presenting evidence, her red heels clicking deliberately as she approached the witness stand. "The prosecution calls Claire Thompson," she announced, her voice smooth but commanding. Claire, dressed in a conservative navy suit chosen to project credibility, approached the stand with visible hesitation. Her hands trembled slightly as she was sworn in, and Ethan noted the flicker of guilt in her eyes. She was a pawn manipulated by Laura's promises of advancement, but her conscience was fraying. "Ms. Thompson," Lavra began, pacing with calculated grace, "please tell the court about your observations of the defendant in the weeks leading up to the theft." Claire cleared her throat, her rehearsed testimony flowing with practiced ease. "I noticed Mr. Morales lingering around the partner's offices during sensitive phone calls," she said, her voice steady but her eyes avoiding Ethan's. "He'd clean the same spot for minutes at a time, clearly eavesdropping on confidential conversations about the Sullivan case." Nathan Brooks' cross-examination was painful to watch. He stood, adjusting his crook tie, and stammered, "Isn't it his job to clean those areas thoroughly?" His question drew condescending smiles from the prosecution team, and Claire responded with rehearsed firmness. "Never. It was only near the partners' offices, and only during important calls." Ethan's pen moved across his notebook, capturing the exchange. 10:32 a.m. Claire's testimony coerced. Laura's influence clear. He knew Claire was telling the truth as she saw it, but her observations were skewed by Laura's manipulation. He felt a pang of sympathy. She was young, ambitious, and caught in a web she didn't fully understand. But sympathy wouldn't sway the jury. Evidence would. The prosecution's case unfolded like a well-oiled machine. Lavra presented surveillance footage showing Louise entering the document room at 11:47 p.m., the timestamp perfectly aligning with his cleaning schedule. The video's grainy quality obscured details, making it impossible to see what he was doing inside. William followed with financial records, revealing a $50,000 deposit into an account allegedly tied to Louise. "These funds," William declared, gesturing to a chart projected on the courtroom screen, "came from an offshore account linked to Sullivan Group's legal team." A clear bribe. The jury leaned forward, captivated by the narrative. Ethan's face remained impassive, but his Mind raced. The account was a forgery, its metadata expertly manipulated by Laura's tech team. He'd traced a digital trail weeks ago, but exposing it now would tip his hand too early. Instead, he watched as William and Laura built their case. There, confidence bordering on arrogance. They believed they'd crafted the perfect frame-up, but every lie they told was another thread in the net Ethan was weaving. During the lunch recess, William cornered Nathan in the courthouse cafeteria, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Nathan, you're fighting a losing battle here," he said, sipping an espresso as if discussing the weather. "Why put your client through this? A guilty plea would be better for everyone." The threat beneath his words was clear. Back off, or face the full weight of Carter and Blake's resources. Nathan, playing his role to perfection, adjusted his glasses nervously. I'll talk to him, Mr. Pierce," he stammered, his eyes darting to the floor. But as William walked away, Nathan's expression hardened. He slipped a note to Ethan as they returned to the defense table. They're overconfident. Stick to the plan. Ethan nodded subtly, his eyes fixed on the prosecution's next witness, Tom Rivera, the maintenance worker who'd been bought off. Tom took the stand, sporting a suspiciously expensive watch that gleamed under the courtroom lights. "Mr. Rivera," Laura began, her tone almost theatrical, "please tell the court about your conversation with the defendant on the night of March 15th. Tom leaned forward, his voice rehearsed but convincing. "Luis came to me that night, bragging about how he was going to make more money than he'd ever seen. Said some lawyers from the other side were paying big for inside information." Ethan's pen moved faster now, sketching not words but a diagram-odd timeline of Tom's movements that night, cross-referenced with camera footage Ethan had already secured. He'd seen Tom meeting with William in the sub-basement, a cash stuffed envelope changing hands. The watch was a nice touch, Ethan thought, but sloppy. It was a breadcrumb that could lead Emily Harris to the truth. From the gallery, Emily noticed Ethan sketching. Her curiosity piqued. His hand moved with the confident strokes of someone used to making executive decisions, not cleaning floors. She jotted a note. Morale's demeanor inconsistent with background. Check personnel file. Her investigation was running parallel, too. The trial, and the more she dug, the more she suspected Carter and Blake's evidence was a facade. Last night, she'd found a glitch in the security footage, a missing 3-minute segment that didn't align with the logs. She'd sent it to an FBI tech team for analysis, and her gut told her Luis Morales was more than he seemed. The afternoon brought more damning evidence. William presented emails allegedly showing communication between Luis and Sullivan groups. Lawyers, their metadata crafted to create a perfect paper trail of betrayal. "Your Honor," he declared, gesturing to a series of charts, "we have irrefutable proof of conspiracy, phone records, bank transfers, building access logs, all pointing to the defendant." Judge Coleman studied the exhibits with a practiced eye, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Brooks," she said, turning to the defense, "do you have any objections?" Nathan stood, his tie still crooked. "No, Your Honor," he mumbled, drawing a smirk from William. But Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, unnoticed by the prosecution. The emails were a masterpiece of forgery, but they'd left a digital footprint Ethan had already traced to Laura's personal server. He wrote in his notebook, 2:15 p.m. emails presented. Weak link. Metia dia tad. As the day drew to a close, Laura prepared to call a technical expert to testify about the surveillance system. But her movements faltered when she caught Ethan's gaze. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and a chill ran down her spine. There was a calculating intelligence in his stare, a depth that didn't belong to a janitor. She shook it off, attributing it to stress, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Bailiff approached to escort Ethan back to his cell. As he stood, He straightened his jumpsuit with a deliberate motion, mirroring the way William adjusted his suit. The parallel wasn't lost on Emily Harris, who had spent the day watching the proceedings with growing suspicion. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Judge Coleman announced, her gavel echoing through the now quiet courtroom dawn as the prosecution team gathered their materials. Celebrating what they saw as an inevitable victory, Ethan scribbled. One final note. Day 1 complete. They're blind to the trap. The courtroom emptied, but the tension lingered, a storm gathering strength for the explosion to come. The third day of the trial dawned over the New York County Courthouse, the morning sun casting a golden glow through the tall windows of courtroom 2B. The gallery was packed with reporters, their notebooks poised to capture what they assumed would be the final nail in Louise Morales's coffin. At the prosecution table, William Pierce and Laura Bennett exuded confidence, their designer attire gleaming as they arranged their papers with meticulous care. Laura's diamond earrings sparkled in the light, a silent testament to the wealth they'd amassed through their schemes. Across the room, Ethan Carter, still disguised as Louise Morales, sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos about to unfold. His small leather-bound notebook lay closed before him, its pages filled with the precise observations that would soon turn the tables. Judge Margaret Coleman entered, her steel-gray eyes scanning the room as the bailiff called, "All rise." Her reputation for seeing through legal theatrics made her the perfect arbiter for what was about to happen. Nathan Brooks, Ethan's court-appointed attorney and undercover FBI agent, adjusted his crook tie, maintaining his facade of incompetence. But his eyes flickered with anticipation, a silent signal to Ethan that the moment was near. William rose to conclude the prosecution's case, his voice dripping with certainty. "Your Honor, the evidence is irrefutable. Louise Morales stole the Sullivan case files, driven by greed and collusion with opposing counsel. The prosecution rests." He turned to glance at Ethan, expecting to see defeat in the janitor's eyes. Instead, Ethan sat straighter than usual, his presence somehow filling the room despite his prison attire. A ripple of unease passed through William, but he dismissed it as nerves. Judge Coleman turned to the defense table. "Mr. Brooks, you may call your first witness." Nathan stood awkwardly, his briefcase spilling papers as he fumbled. "Your Honor, he began, but Ethan's hand on his arm stopped him mid-sentence. The courtroom fell silent as Ethan rose, his movements deliberate, almost commanding. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected authority that made several jurors sit up straighter. "I request permission to present evidence in my own defense." A murmur rippled through the gallery. William's smile widened. This was better than he'd hoped. A desperate defendant taking matters into his own hands usually meant an easy win. Laura leaned back, her red heels tapping softly, confident in their airtight case. But Judge Coleman peered over her glasses, studying Ethan with a curiosity she hadn't shown before. "Mr. Morales, while you have the right to defend yourself, I strongly advise against it. Mr. Brooks is your counsel." "Your Honor," Ethan interrupted, his accent suddenly less pronounced, his tone smooth and assured, "I understand the risks. But what I'm about to present will change the entire complexion of this case." Something in his voice a quiet certainty made the judge pause. After a moment, she nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Morales." Ethan reached into a manila envelope Nathan had been holding, producing a thick, professionally bound document sealed with a notary stamp. "I'd like to present this to the court," he said, his voice steady. "This is a complete copy of the allegedly missing Sullivan case files, printed and notarized 3 days before their supposed disappearance." The courtroom erupted in whispers. William's smile froze, his hand twitching as if to object. Laura's pen stopped mid-note, her face paling. Judge Coleman accepted the document, her eyebrows rising as she examined it. This appears to be authenticated by Carter and Blake's own digital certification system, she said, her tone laced with intrigue. Objection. William shot to his feet, his voice cracking slightly. This evidence wasn't provided in discovery, because it wasn't in my possession during discovery. Your Honor, Ethan replied smoothly, producing a chain of custody form. It was held in escrow by an independent legal firm and released to me this morning. He handed the form to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Detective Emily Harris, seated in the gallery, leaned forward, her notebook forgotten. The confident expressions on William and Laura's faces were cracking, and she could sense the tide turning. Furthermore, Ethan continued, pulling a small USB drive from the envelope, I'd like to present surveillance footage from the document room, not the edited version shown yesterday, but the complete recording. Laura's face went ashen, her tablet slipping slightly in her hands. Objection, Your Honor, she said, her voice sharp. We've already established the surveillance system was compromised. Ethan's eyes locked onto hers, a faint smile playing on his lips. Yes, it was. The firm's official system was tampered with, but this footage comes from a secondary system installed with the approval of Carter and Blake's actual leadership. The courtroom buzzed with confusion. Judge Coleman banged her gavel once, restoring order. Mr. Morales, are you saying there was an unauthorized surveillance system in place? Not unauthorized, Your Honor, Ethan said, producing another document, simply unknown to certain parties. I have here the authorization for its installation, signed by the firm's CEO 3 months ago. He handed the paper to the bailiff, his gaze shifting to William. Would you like to know why it was kept from you, Mr. Pierce? William's confidence crumbled visibly, his hands gripping the table. That's impossible, he stammered. Any such authorization would have crossed my desk, unless it was deliberately kept from you. Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The tension was palpable, even Nathan Brooks looking momentarily stunned, though his surprise was part of the act. From the gallery, Claire Thompson sat frozen, her earlier testimony now a weight pressing on her conscience. She'd lied about Louise, but the certainty in his voice made her question everything Laura had told her. Your Honor, Ethan continued, I request permission to play this footage. It will conclusively prove who moved the Sullivan files, and why. Judge Coleman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed. As the courthouse technician set up the video equipment, Ethan moved to assist, his hands displaying a familiarity with the technology that seemed out of place. For a janitor, his movements were precise, practiced, drawing a curious glance from Emily Harris. The screen flickered to life, showing the document room at 11:43 p.m. on the night in question. Unlike the grainy footage presented earlier, this video was crystal clear, with perfect audio. William and Laura appeared, their voices unmistakable. Make sure you get everything, William's recorded voice said, his tone urgent as he stuffed files into a briefcase. We need this case to disappear completely. The Sullivan settlement would ruin us. Laura's voice followed, cold and calculated. The digital copies are already corrupted. Once these are gone, there's nothing left. William slammed his hand on the mute button, but it was too late. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the truth unfolded on screen. Jurors gasped, reporters scribbled furiously, and Claire's hands covered her mouth, her eyes wide with realization. Ethan stood calmly in the center of the chaos, his jumpsuit now seeming more like a costume than a mark of shame. Your Honor, he said, his voice carrying a new weight, I have more evidence to present, including proof of systematic corruption within Carter and Blake that goes far beyond this single case. He produced a stack of documents, each bearing the firm's letterhead. These are internal memos detailing evidence manipulation in 17 other major cases over the past 2 years. Judge Coleman's expression darkened as she reviewed the papers. These authorization codes are executive level, she said, her voice low. That's impossible, Lavra burst out, her composed facade shattering. Only 3 people have that clearance, William, myself, and the CEO. Ethan finished, his lips curving into a slight smile. The courtroom fell silent, the implications of his words hanging in the air. Emily Harris straightened in her seat, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Ethan's precise handwriting, his commanding presence, the way he carried himself, even in prison clothes, it all made sense now. Your Honor, Ethan said, reaching into the envelope one final time, my name is not Luz Morales. I am Ethan Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Carter & Blake. He held up an ID card, its official seal gleaming under the courtroom lights. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. William staggered, supported by a court officer. Laura's glasses slipped from her fingers, clattering on the table. The gallery erupted, reporters shouting questions as junior associates exchanged shocked glances. That's impossible, William croaked, his face ashen. Ethan Carter is in Europe on medical leave. We've been receiving his authorizations for months. Ethan's smile was cold, unyielding. No, Mr. Pierce, you've been receiving carefully prepared authorizations to maintain the illusion I was away. Every signature, every document, every video call was orchestrated while I worked within my own firm, watching, learning, and gathering evidence. He turned to the stunned courtroom. 8 months ago, I noticed irregularities in our case. Management system files accessed at odd hours, settlements that didn't match our records. I suspected a breach, but what I found was worse. Systematic corruption orchestrated by people I trusted. He gestured to the documents. These are the original Sullivan files, showing your manipulation of evidence, your offshore accounts, and your connections to opposing counsel. Judge Coleman's eyes widened as she reviewed the evidence. Mr. Carter, am I to understand you assumed the role of a janitor in your own firm? Yes, Your Honor, Ethan said, his posture shifting to reflect years of boardroom authority. With the FBI's cooperation, I became Luz Morales to expose a network of corruption that threatened our firm and our justice system. From the gallery, Emily Harris watched with professional admiration. This wasn't just a trial. It was a masterclass in undercover work. She stood, her badge in hand, as court officers moved to detain William and Laura, who were edging toward the exit. James Pierce, Lavra Bennett, she said, her voice firm. You're under arrest for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. As the courtroom descended into chaos, Ethan stood at its center, his jumpsuit a symbol of the justice he'd fought for. The trap had sprung, but the biggest shock was yet to come. In his hand, he held one final piece of evidence that would shake the legal world to its core. The chaos in courtroom 2B was palpable as court officers snapped handcuffs on William Pierce and Lavra Bennett, their designer suits now seeming to deflate with their dignity. The once confident senior partners of Carter and Blake stood stunned, their faces drained of color as Detective Emily Harris read them their rights. James Pierce, Lavra Bennett, you're under arrest for conspiracy, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and attempted fraud, she said, her voice cutting through the din of the gallery. Reporters typed furiously on their phones. Junior associates exchanged shocked glances, and curious onlookers craned their necks to catch every detail of the unfolding drama. Ethan Carter, no longer Luz Morales, stood at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a stark reminder of the lengths he'd gone to expose the truth. His eyes, calm but resolute, followed the officers as they led William and Laura away. Judge Margaret Coleman's gavel cracked like thunder, silencing the room. "Order in the court," she commanded, her steel-gray eyes fixed on Ethan. "Mr. Carter, your actions have exposed a grave injustice, but this court needs to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Please continue with your evidence." Ethan nodded, reaching into his manila envelope with the same precision he'd used as a janitor to polish glass. "Your Honor," he said, producing a series of documents bearing Carter and Blake's letterhead. "These are internal memos detailing a pattern of evidence manipulation in 17 major cases over the past 2 years. They include forged settlements, tampered jury lists, and connections to offshore accounts." He handed the papers to the bailiff, his voice steady but laced with a quiet anger. This corruption wasn't limited to the Sullivan case. It was a cancer spreading through the firm, orchestrated by those I trusted most. William, now seated between 2 court officers, lunged forward, his cuffs clinking. "Those are confidential firm documents." He had no right to. His outburst was cut short by Ethan's sharp interjection. "I had every right, Mr. Pierce," he said, holding up another document. "These memos were accessed through legal channels, as you'll see from the executive authorization codes at the bottom." He turned to Judge Coleman. "Signed by me, as CEO, with the approval of the firm's board." Laura's composure shattered completely. "That's impossible," she cried, her voice breaking. "Only 3 people have that clearance, William, myself, and—" She stopped, her face paling as the truth hit her. Ethan's slight smile was cold, unyielding. "And the CEO, Ms. Bennett. You forgot the most important one." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but Ethan's presence commanded silence. From the gallery, Claire Thompson sat frozen, her earlier testimony against Louise Ethan now a crushing weight. She'd been manipulated by Laura's promises, but the revelation of Ethan's identity and the depth of the corruption made her question everything. Her hands trembled as she clutched her notebook. The promise of a partnership now a hollow lure. Judge Coleman examined the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "Mr. Carter," she said, "these allegations extend beyond Carter and Blake. Are you suggesting a broader conspiracy?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied, producing a final piece of evidence, USB drive labeled Operation Clean Sweep. This contains footage of William and Laura meeting with representatives from 3 other major law firms, discussing coordinated evidence tampering and jury manipulation. The FBI has already begun investigations based on this evidence. FBI Agent Nathan Brooks, shedding his bumbling lawyer persona, stood and flashed his badge. "Agent Nathan Brooks, Your Honor," he said, his voice now crisp and authoritative. "I've been working with Mr. Carter for 8 months to expose this network. The evidence he's provided has led to warrants for 17 individuals across Carter and Blake and beyond, with charges including racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy under RICO statutes." The gallery erupted again, but Judge Coleman let the chaos swirl, her focus on Ethan. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "But why go to such lengths, Mr. Carter? An internal investigation would have been detected," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm but respectful. "William and Laura were too smart, too careful. They had to believe they were untouchable. As Luis Morales, I was invisible to them, free to gather evidence they'd never suspect." As court officers detained several junior associates implicated. In the memos, Laura made a desperate move. "Wait," she called, turning to Emily Harris. "I can give you names, bigger names. There's someone above us, pulling the strings." Her voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes darting nervously. Emily's brow furrowed, but she nodded, signaling an officer to escort Laura to a holding room for further questioning. Ethan's expression didn't change, but he noted Laura's plea in his mind. a loose thread that could unravel an even larger web. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood before the remaining Carter and Blake staff in the firm's conference room, the same room where William had raged just days ago. The air was heavy with shock and uncertainty, the firm's reputation in tatters. Claire Thompson sat near the back, her face pale but resolute. Ethan, now in a crisp charcoal suit, addressed the group with the authority of a CEO who'd earned his place twice over. "This is a dark day for Carter and Blake," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "But it's also a new beginning. We will conduct a full audit of every case handled by the corrupted partners over the past 5 years. Any client affected will be notified and compensated. From this moment, we rebuild on a foundation of absolute integrity." His gaze softened as he looked at Claire. "Some of you were misled, pressured into actions you didn't fully understand. Today, you have a choice. Stand for justice or walk away." Claire met his eyes, tears brimming. She stood, her voice trembling but clear. "Mr. Carter, I lied about you in court. I'm sorry. I want to help fix this." Ethan nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then start by telling the truth, Ms. Thompson. We need people like you to rebuild what was broken." That evening, in a quiet moment alone, Ethan stood in his corner office, the Manhattan skyline sprawling before him. He traced the edge of his desk, remembering his father, a small-town lawyer who taught him that justice was the foundation of the law. The memory had driven him to become Luis Morales, to sacrifice his comfort for the truth. He'd watched his firm's ideals erode under William and Laura's greed, and the pain of that betrayal still lingered. But today, he'd taken the first step toward redemption. Across town, Detective Emily Harris met with FBI agents in a secure briefing room. Laura's cryptic offer to name a higher power had opened a new lead, a shadowy figure linked to organized crime, possibly influencing multiple law firms. Emily handed over a file Ethan had provided, detailing offshore accounts tied to the Sullivan case. "Carter took a hell of a risk," she said, shaking her head. "But he's given us enough to shake up the legal world." One of the agents, a grizzled veteran, studied the file. "This goes deeper than we thought. Sullivan's just the tip of the iceberg. We'll need Carter's help to keep digging." Emily nodded, her thoughts drifting to Ethan. "He's not done yet," she said. "Men like him don't walk away from a fight like this." Back at Carter and Blake, Ethan sat at his desk, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. A small cleaning cart sat in the corner of his office, a quiet reminder of his time as Luis Morales. He opened his notebook, its pages filled with precise notes that had brought down a corrupt empire. But Laura's words echoed in his mind. "Someone above us. The fight wasn't over." He closed the notebook, his resolve hardening. Carter and Blake would rise again, and he would ensure justice prevailed, no matter who stood in his way. The late afternoon sun bathed Carter and Blake's corner office in a warm glow as Ethan Carter stood at his desk. The Manhattan skyline, a testament to the empire he'd fought to save. The cleaning cart in the corner, a relic of his time as Luis Morales, stood as a silent reminder of his 8-month odyssey. Now dressed in a tailored suit, Ethan was once again the CEO, but the weight of his journey lingered in his steady gaze. He opened his notebook, its pages a chronicle of betrayal and redemption, and added a final entry. Day 3, trial complete. Justice served. Rebuild begins. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their headlines already proclaiming the fall of Carter and Blake's corrupt elite. Ethan stepped onto the marble steps, the cleaning cart's faint squeak echoing behind him as a maintenance worker passed a nod to the unsung heroes who'd inspired his disguise. "The law isn't a tool for the powerful," he told the press, his voice resolute. "It's the foundation of justice, and sometimes that justice comes from the most unexpected places. His words, carried by every major outlet, resonated with a city hungry for integrity. Back in his office, Ethan received an anonymous email, a cryptic reference to another case, hinting at deeper corruption. He closed his laptop, the fight far from over. Carter and Blake would rise again, rebuilt on truth, with young lawyers like Claire Thompson leading the charge. As he looked out over the city, the sunset painting the skyline gold, Ethan felt his father's lessons echoing. Justice was worth any sacrifice. Even as CEO's corner office for a janitor's mop. This story is a testament to the power of humility and resilience. Ethan's transformation into Luis Morales shows that true strength lies not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to stand for what's right, even when it means becoming invisible. His journey teaches us that justice can emerge from the shadows, carried by those society overlooks. It's a reminder to question arrogance, value every individual, and fight for integrity, no matter the cost. Ethan's sacrifice, trading boardrooms for brooms, underscores the humanistic ideal that no one is too small to make a difference. If this tale of justice and redemption moved you, subscribe to Legacy Stories for more gripping narratives that celebrate the human spirit and the triumph of truth. Join our community to discover stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us that heroes can wear any guise, even a janitor's uniform.